What kind of man does this? It was supposed to be a quiet drive, just a short trip between the base and his uncle's old ranch, a place where Sergeant Cole Hayes went to clear his head after every deployment. But as the sun began to dip, over the dusty road stretching through the middle of nowhere, something caught his eye. A figure, small, shaking, tied to the utility pole ahead. He slowed instinctively, squinting through the windshield, unsure if it was just wind-blown debris. But as the truck crept closer, his heart stopped. There weren't just one. There were three. 3 tiny German Shepherd puppies, barely a few months old, tethered together with a coarse rope wrapped twice around the pole and knotted crudely at the base. Their fur was patchy and caked in mud, their ribs pressed against their skin. One lay completely motionless while the other 2 flinched at the sound of the engine. Cole slammed the brakes, threw the truck into park, and leapt out. Hey, easy. I'm not going to hurt you," he said, crouching low, voice calm but shaking. His boots scraped the gravel as he approached. The puppies didn't run. They couldn't. Their paws were bloody, scraped raw from struggling against the knot. One whimpered so softly it nearly broke him. The rope had been tied tight, too high for the pups to sit, forcing them to stand or choke. He pulled out his pocket knife and cut it quickly, his jaw clenched as the last thread snapped. The puppies collapsed into a trembling heap at his feet. He didn't understand it. They weren't dumped in the woods. This was deliberate. They were left in plain sight, out here, in the open. Someone wanted them found. Or worse, someone didn't care if they were. Cole checked their bodies gently. One had a swollen leg, likely sprained. Another had cuts around the neck from the rope. The smallest one, a black-furred runt, couldn't lift her head. Her eyes fluttered, but she was still breathing. The soldier inside him roared with anger, but the man who knew what loyalty looked like, felt something else entirely. He scooped them up, all 3 fitting awkwardly in his arms, and carried them to the truck. The back seat became a makeshift triage station. He wrapped them in his jacket, turned the heater on low, and whispered softly, "You're all right now. You hear me? I got you." As he drove, he scanned the roadside in his mirrors, but there was no one. No old man, no vehicle, just the endless stretch of asphalt disappearing into the dusk. But the image burned into his mind. A man, old enough to know better, tying up 3 helpless pups like they were trash. By the time Cole reached his uncle's ranch, night had fallen. He carried the pups inside and laid them gently on a pile of blankets near the fireplace. His uncle, an old vet tech from back in the day, took one look and said, "Whoever did this should be chained up the same way." They cleaned the wounds, warmed milk for the 2 who could drink, rehydrated the smallest with drops of water from a soaked cloth. For hours, Cole didn't leave their side. He didn't know their names, didn't know where they came from. But as one of the pups, ears too big for his head, lifted his gaze to meet Cole's, something settled deep inside him. These weren't just puppies. They were meant for something, and someone had tried to erase that. But Cole? He wasn't about to let that happen. The next morning, the ranch was still soaked in the hush of dawn when Cole stepped into the den. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm flicker over the room where the puppies slept bundled together in a cocoon of blankets. The smallest one, her head resting on a rolled-up sweatshirt, breathed softly but steadily now. Her chest rose and fell with more strength than it had last night. The other 2 had shifted in the night, curling tightly around her as if shielding her from anything else the world might try to do. Cole watched them for a long moment, arms crossed, heart heavy. He'd seen damage before, on men, on civilians, on animals caught in the crossfire of war. But this was something else entirely. These weren't battlefield scars. These were the result of deliberate neglect. Someone had looked into the eyes of these pups and decided they didn't matter, and that made his blood boil. His uncle walked in with a fresh pot of coffee and a thick manila envelope tucked under his arm. "I did some digging," he said, placing the folder on the table. You were right to call this in. These dogs weren't bred by accident. Cole opened the envelope slowly. Inside were printed pages, blurry black and white copies of classified procurement forms and handler assignments. His uncle explained. A buddy of mine at the old Fort Elliott unit pulled these for me last night. Seems the Army contracted a series of K9 litters under a private training facility 3 counties over. Quiet stuff. Not public-facing. Not even listed on military directories. He pointed to a serial code at the bottom of the document. These match the chipped frequencies that would have been implanted in working dog pups. Only these pups don't have functioning chips. Somebody either wiped them or removed them. Cole exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Why? Because, his uncle said quietly, the moment those chips are erased, they stop being property. They become forgotten. Easier to dispose of. No questions asked. Cole looked over at the pups again. The larger male was awake now, eyes tracking his every movement, intelligent and still. The middle one had started licking at the smallest, female's paw, nudging her gently as if encouraging her to get up. Cole could see it now, clear as day. The posture, the awareness, the instinct to protect. These weren't just discarded mutts. These were K9 stock, born to serve, bred for precision. And someone had decided they were broken before they ever had a chance to prove otherwise. He knelt down beside them, resting his hand on the floor where they could sniff it. The big one padded over, cautiously but without fear. He sniffed, then rested his head on Cole's wrist. It wasn't affection. It was something else. Acceptance. Cole whispered, "You weren't the mistake. You were just in the wrong hands." He spent the rest of the morning documenting everything, photos of their wounds, evidence of the rope burns, the coordinates where he'd found them. He submitted a quiet report through back channels to the military investigative unit he used to work with before his discharge. Not an official complaint, just a request for information. The kind that got passed desk to desk until someone with a conscience decided to dig deeper. That evening, he took the pups outside for the first time. The sun had dipped low enough that the Texas heat no longer stung, and the earth was soft from last night's rain. He set them down gently in the grass. At first, they froze. Then slowly they began to move, sniffing, testing their steps, stretching out legs that had been curled too long in fear. Freya, that's what he called the smallest one, limped but didn't falter. She moved with a kind of fragile determination, dragging her back paw slightly but never sitting down. Axel, the middle one, bounded forward a few feet before circling back to check on her. Diesel, the largest, stood still for a while, staring out over the pasture, ears twitching, nose in the air like he was already guarding something invisible. Cole watched, arms folded, pride welling in his chest. They weren't just healing, they were remembering who they were. Later that night, as he sat on the porch with all 3 curled, up by his boots a ping came through his secure email. A short reply from an old Intel contact. It read, "Your 3 pups were part of Project Ember, classified breeding program for K9 Elite. Shut down 8 months ago. Records sealed, names erased. You didn't find them by accident." Cole read it twice, then looked down at the pups. Freya's breathing was slower now, more peaceful. Axel twitched in his sleep. Diesel was awake, staring out into the darkness, still as stone. And deep down, Cole knew, someone had tried to erase them from existence. Now he was going to make sure the world never forgot them. It had been 5 days since Cole received the confirmation about Project Ember, and he hadn't stopped thinking about it for a second. The idea that these 3 German Shepherd pups had once been bred for elite service but tossed aside like broken equipment made his jaw tighten every time he watched them sleep. Freya had started walking better. Her limp hadn't disappeared, but she no longer dragged her back leg. Axel was the first to respond to his voice commands, already coming when called and sitting without hesitation. Diesel, still the quietest, remained the watcher, always slightly apart from the others, alert, scanning, but Cole could see the fire behind those calm eyes. It wasn't disobedience, it was something deeper, a mind thinking 2 steps ahead. Cole began their training on the 6th day. Nothing advanced, not yet, but he knew what made a K9 tick, and he knew the bond between handler and dog was built on mutual understanding, not commands barked from above. He started with scent tracking, laying short trails using articles of his own clothing. Axel took to it immediately, tail high, nose to the ground, zigzagging with excitement. Freya was slower, more cautious but precise. Diesel didn't move at first. He watched the other 2 complete their drills. He sat, quietly observing, until it was his turn. Cole gave the same signal. Diesel sniffed the shirt once, then began to walk. Not run, not bounce, but walk the path, methodically, exactly. When he reached the marker at the end, he stopped and turned back. It wasn't for a treat. It wasn't for praise. It was for confirmation that Cole had seen what he already knew he could do. Cole knelt, placed his hand on Diesel's chest, and nodded. "You've got it. You've always had it." It was during one of those late training evenings that a truck pulled up on the outer trail near the fence line. Cole stood up immediately, his instincts sharpening. No one came out here without calling. First, the engine cut off and a tall figure stepped out, gray cap, clean boots, pressed jeans. He walked with a soldier's stance. Cole narrowed his eyes and stepped forward. "Didn't expect to find you here, Hayes," the man called out. His voice was familiar. Too familiar. Cole froze for half a second before the name clicked. Lieutenant Braden Knox. Knox had worked internal, Dewan affairs. Cole hadn't seen him since the inquiry after a failed mission 2 years ago, a mission where a handler's poor judgment had cost both his dog and a civilian life. Knox had led the debrief. Cold, clinical, forgettable in his tone, unforgettable in the way he seemed to look through people instead of at them. "What are you doing here?" Cole asked, keeping his body between the pups and the man. Knox looked over his shoulder toward the field where Axel and Freya stood, suddenly stiff. Diesel had already stepped forward, standing half a pace ahead of the others, not growling, not moving, just guarding. "There's noise about those dogs," Knox said flatly. "You've made people nervous." "Good," Cole replied. Knox smirked, but his eyes didn't. They were never supposed to leave that facility. Project Ember wasn't canceled. It was buried. Quietly. That's how they wanted it. But now I hear whispers. A soldier rescues 3 pups with wiped chips. Then you report them, and someone up the chain starts asking questions again. "They were tied to a pole like garbage," Cole snapped. "I don't care what chain of command buried them. They're alive, and I won't let them disappear again." Knox walked forward slowly, his boots crunching the gravel. "They're unstable, Cole. That's why Ember was shut down. The genetics were strong, but the behavioral results were inconsistent. They couldn't be controlled, couldn't bond to traditional handlers. You think just because you got them, to sit and stay that they're ready?" Cole's hands clenched into fists. "No," he said. "I think they never needed control. They needed trust." Knox tilted his head slightly. "You know they'll never be accepted into a public unit. No official K9 agency's going to touch dogs flagged by a failed black program. They're a risk." "They're a chance," Cole said, "and I'm not asking for your permission." Knox studied him for a long moment, then gave a half shrug. "Just be careful, Hayes. Sometimes the things we try to save end up destroying us." Then he turned and walked back to his truck, leaving a trail of dust behind him. That night, Cole didn't sleep. He lay on the floor near the pups, watching the flicker of the fire reflect in Diesel's eyes. He knew Knox hadn't come to warn him. He'd come to remind him that these dogs were supposed to be forgotten. But the way Diesel had stepped forward, without command, The way Axel had placed himself between Freya and the stranger, the way Freya had stood her ground even while limping. None of that looked like instability to him. It looked like instinct finally given a chance to rise. Cole wasn't raising rejects. He was building redemption. By the end of the second week, the pups weren't just healing, they were transforming. Freya had gained full control over her gait, her limp reduced to a minor hitch barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. Axel had grown stronger and bolder, now capable of scaling short platforms and weaving between cones with unshakable focus. Diesel, ever quiet, had developed a strange, commanding presence during training. He didn't seek attention. He never needed correction. He simply watched, learned, and acted when it mattered. But Cole knew something was building beneath the surface. Knox's visit wasn't a casual drop-in. It was a warning, and the kind that didn't echo unless more eyes were watching. Cole could feel the pressure mounting. Phone calls from unknown numbers. Blank emails with timestamps but no message. Someone, somewhere, was keeping track. Still, he refused to stop. The next phase of training included simulated search and rescue scenarios. Cole set up scent drills in the nearby woods, planted decoys, laid distraction trails, even timed how long the pups took to pick the real target. Each time, Diesel outperformed expectations. Freya followed quickly, almost like she was studying Diesel's every move. Axel sometimes got sidetracked chasing rustling leaves or strange sounds, but he always circled back, loyal and focused when it mattered. Then, without warning, the test came. Cole was in town running errands when the emergency alert hit local law enforcement radio. A child had gone missing from a rest stop 15 miles out, near the edge of the wilderness preserve. The boy had last been seen by his mother just outside the restroom area. 1 minute he was there. The next, gone. No cameras, no tracks, no sound. Just fear spreading like wildfire through the community. By the time Cole arrived back at the ranch, 2 patrol cars were parked by the fence. A deputy he recognized from years back stepped out and approached him with urgency in his eyes. "We heard you've got trained dogs." "They're still in progress," Cole replied. "Not certified." The deputy looked past him to the field where the 3 stood at the ready. "We don't care. We just need help." Cole loaded the pups into his truck without hesitation. He didn't have time to call anyone. Not Knox, not the agency contacts, not even his uncle. This wasn't about proving a point. This was about a missing child. At the rest stop, chaos reigned. Officers barked orders. Parents clutched crying. Kids. Searchers in reflective vests combed the outer edges of the woods. Cole stepped out of the truck and opened the back door. Axel jumped down first, tail high. Freya followed, eyes scanning. Diesel stepped out last, his gaze already locked on something beyond the trees. Cole didn't speak. He just handed Diesel a piece of the boy's hoodie, a cloth retrieved from the family's car, and crouched beside him. "You know what to do," he whispered. Diesel sniffed it once, then again. He didn't bark, didn't twitch. He just moved. Through the tall grass, beyond the parking lot, into the tree line. Cole ran behind him, heart pounding, Freya and Axel flanking them on either side. The world narrowed to footsteps. Rustling leaves, the wind shifting between trees. 5 minutes. 10. Still no sound. Then Diesel stopped. He stood at the edge of a dry creek bed, nose in the air, and let out a single, low whine. Cole caught up and froze. Below the drop, beneath, an overhang of brush and rock was the boy, curled up, shivering, covered in dirt and tears, but breathing. He had fallen, too scared to move or call out. His ankle twisted, his body scraped, but alive. Diesel didn't approach. He simply held the perimeter, ensuring nothing else lurked. Nearby. Cole slid down the slope, carefully lifted the child into his arms, and radioed in the find. Minutes later, emergency responders flooded the area. Medics took the boy, officers clapped Cole on the back, parents cried, but Cole didn't bask in it. He looked at Diesel, sitting at the edge of the creek bed, watching the rescue unfold with quiet composure, not waiting for credit, not seeking praise, just doing what he was born to do. Later, at the ranch, the pups lay resting in the grass as the sun dropped behind the hills. Cole stood by the fence, hands gripping the rail. Barrett, who had driven in after hearing the news, walked up beside him. "You realize what you've got here, right?" Cole nodded slowly. "Yeah, 3 dogs that the system threw away. And one of them just saved a kid's life." Barrett didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "There'll be calls now. Attention. Maybe pressure. They'll want these dogs back in the system, or buried deeper than before." Cole looked at him with steady eyes. Let them come. But this time, they won't be taking anything. The story spread faster than Cole expected. Within 48 hours, local news stations were running segments titled "Uncertified Hero Dog Saves Missing Boy," and social media flooded with grainy photos of Diesel standing at the edge of the dry creek bed, eyes focused, unmoved even as flashing lights and chaos surrounded him. People praised the pup's calm, his instincts, his incredible success without formal training. But Cole knew better. Diesel wasn't untrained. He had been born for it. He had simply been denied the chance to prove it. The morning after the report aired, Cole received the call he knew was coming. A blocked number, a clipped voice, no names, just a demand. "Hand them over. You've had your moment." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just hung up the phone and stepped out onto the porch where Diesel sat beside the rocking chair like he had every morning for weeks now. Freya was dozing under the table. Axel was chewing a rope with one eye on the road. They didn't know they were being watched, tracked, considered for reclamation. But Cole did. And he wasn't about to let it happen. By midday, 2 black SUVs pulled up at the end of the long dirt drive. They didn't hide their purpose. 4 men stepped out, clean suits, buzz cuts, cold eyes, the kind that didn't knock. Cole met them. Halfway down the path, standing with his hands relaxed at his sides, every part of him calm but immovable. "We're here to collect government property," the tallest one said. "Project Ember was terminated. These dogs are evidence." "They're alive," Cole said plainly, "and they're not going anywhere. Sergeant Hayes, you're interfering with an internal asset recovery operation. Don't make this harder than it has to be." "They were left to die," Cole said, his voice sharper now. "You forfeited any right to call them assets when you tied them to a pole like trash." The man took a step forward. "I don't think you understand the authority." A low growl cut through the air. Diesel had moved behind Cole without a sound, positioning himself directly between the agents and the porch. His stance was unshaken, his body tense, not out of fear, but out of warning. Freya now stood behind him, ears pinned, eyes fixed. Axel, for once, was completely silent. The men paused, not because they were afraid, but because something about the way Diesel looked at them made them feel, for the first time, like they weren't in control. It wasn't defiance, it was judgment. It was the unflinching gaze of something that had been broken and rebuilt by a hand far steadier than theirs. Cole didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped forward and said, "You can file your reports, try your claims, but if you want to take them, you're going to have to go through me, and you'll do it in court, publicly." They didn't reply. They knew what that meant. The story was already out. The boy had been found. The dog had saved him. And now, whether they liked it or not, Diesel and the others had faces, names, support. Without a word, the agents turned and walked back to their vehicles. No threats, no handcuffs, just the silent understanding that the world was watching now, and the old playbook of erasure wouldn't work this time. As the SUVs disappeared down the road, Cole knelt beside Diesel, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. "You did it, buddy. You proved them wrong." In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. A foundation reached out, offering to fund a private facility for canines discarded by failed programs. Barrett came on board to assist with development. Cole was named director of a new initiative, Project Phoenix, not built on control, but on second chances. Freya, Axel, and Diesel remained the heart of it all. They weren't mascots. They were the standard. Freya became the go-to demonstration dog, swift, sharp, a natural at calming new rescues. Axel found his strength in therapy drills, working with young veterans who struggled with PTSD, offering companionship through play and trust. But Diesel remained the constant, not the most playful, not the fastest, but always watching, always there, the silent guardian of the compound. And it was Diesel who, 2 months later, saved another life, this time without ever stepping off the property. A young boy had wandered onto the edge of the fence line during a school visit, unnoticed. By the teachers, Diesel was the first to notice. He moved, not fast, but with certainty, blocking the child from a steep drop near the ravine. When adults finally arrived, the boy was sitting beside Diesel, gently petting his fur, both of them staring off into the distance like they had been talking in a language only they could understand. Diesel never barked, never asked for anything, but from that day forward, every visitor who stepped through the compound's gates would stop when they saw him. Some would ask his name, some would simply stare, and when Cole told them his story, more than one would walk away quietly wiping tears from their eyes, because Diesel wasn't a hero by accident. He was a survivor who had once been erased until someone chose to believe in him. And in return, he gave the world something far greater than obedience. He gave it proof that loyalty, when nurtured instead of commanded, could become something unforgettable.